Hello, and thank you for your interest in the Humanities Initiatives grant program offered by the National Endowment for the Humanities. My name is Julia Nguyen, a program officer in the Division of Education and part of the leadership team for this program. And joining me today are my colleagues, Program Analyst Emily Brantley and Program Officer Jinlei Oakst. This webinar is recorded, but we will also be hosting a live Q&A session for the Humanities Initiatives program on Tuesday, March 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can find the link for the session on the Humanities Initiatives program page at NEH.gov. This webinar is designed to provide examples and explanation in support of the guidelines, also known as the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, available at the program web pages, which can be reached by going to NEH.gov. These guidelines are for applications submitted during the 2024 cycle to fund projects beginning as early as February 2025. Please note that this recording is not a replacement for the specific requirements laid out in the NOFO, and when questions arise, you should first reference that document. I will begin with an overview of the purpose and goals of this program, and then move into specific requirements and questions to consider as you develop your application. Please know that we provide sample narratives and are available to answer questions and review optional draft proposals during the application process. I will discuss these further near the conclusion of this recording. Humanities Initiatives grants strengthen the teaching and study of the humanities at institutions of higher education by developing new or enhancing existing programs, resources, or courses that explore, interpret, and preserve the diversity of human cultures, ideas, and practices, both past and present. Projects must be organized around a core topic or set of themes drawn from humanities areas such as history, philosophy, religion, literature, or humanities-informed composition and writing skills, to name just a few. Remember, you're applying to the National Endowment for the Humanities, so keep the humanities at the core of your project. Projects may, but need not be, related to the cultural identity of the applicant institution. For example, it would be allowable for a Hispanic-serving institution to submit a proposal on African American literature, or for a tribal college to submit a proposal on Shakespeare or any other humanities topic. We welcome any humanities topic. NEH welcomes applications that are modest in scope, duration, and budget, as well as applications for expansive, long-term projects. These grants are designed to be flexible to fit your projects and your institution's needs. Essentially, if you want to do a project that will impact humanities teaching and learning at your college or university, and you can do it in 1 to 3 years for $1 to $150,000, this may be the grant for you. This program supports a wide range of activities, from foundational curricular planning to creating or revising bridge programs, dual enrollment programs, majors, minors, certificates, concentrations, honors programs, first-year seminars, capstone courses, and pathways to graduation or transfer to four-year institutions. It supports developing or enhancing curriculum-focused resources like oral histories, films, teaching modules, podcasts, mapping tools, and guidelines on how to use these humanities resources in the classroom. But wait, there's more. Projects that support students, such as creating the framework for humanities-focused internships or developing opportunities for hands-on or experiential learning, are also eligible. The program supports opportunities for faculty members to study together to improve their capacity to teach the humanities. Partnerships and collaboration with museums, libraries, historical societies, other institutions of higher education, local K-12 school districts, and others are welcome. I would emphasize here that while partnerships and collaborations are welcome, projects should serve a key audience of students and/or faculty from the applicant institution itself. These are just some ideas of what you can do with this grant. Again, it's flexible and can be tailored to support your humanities needs.
There are 5 different categories within the Humanities Initiatives program. In addition to the overarching colleges and universities program, there are also programs that specifically serve tribal colleges and universities, historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, and community colleges. You may find that your college or university is eligible to apply under more than one of these categories, but you will need to choose which one you will submit your application to. For example, let's say your school is a HBCU and it could come in under that broad category for colleges and universities as well. You're allowed to choose whichever category you prefer, but I recommend, if you're eligible, to apply under one of those more specific categories rather than under the broad colleges and universities category. Each program is reviewed separately, and reviewers will be drawn from the types of institutions represented. For example, review panels for humanities initiatives at HBCUs would have reviewers who are HBCU faculty or administrators, and would therefore have more insight into these institutions' needs and concerns than reviewers in the more general humanities initiatives at colleges and universities program might. Your project may also be a good fit for another NEH grant program, Humanities Initiatives programs that connect humanities and non-humanities departments, what we call the Humanities Connections program. This program, for example, may also fit under the, so the Humanities Initiatives may also connect with the Humanities Connections grant program, whose applications are due in September. If your institution meets certain eligibility criteria, you may also be able to apply to the Spotlight on the Humanities in Higher Education grant program, whose applications are due in October. You can find more information about these programs and their eligibility requirements on the NEH program pages. However, because these programs have overlapping review periods, you must choose which one to submit your project to, one or the other, because you cannot submit multiple applications to NEH for essentially the same project. If you or your institution want to apply for more than one project, that is absolutely allowed, as long as they're different and unique projects and don't have overlapping costs. There is no limit to how many different applications one institution can submit under this grant opportunity. The key here is that you only submit one application per project.
At NEH.gov, within the program web pages, you can find a wealth of information, including frequently asked questions and important program dates. We also offer several sample narratives as examples of well-written applications. Each of the 5 categories has different sample narratives, though all of them could be helpful to you as examples of humanities initiatives projects. So I strongly recommend exploring the samples on each of these 5 pages. These samples are not complete applications. Some of their attachments have been redacted, but they contain the narrative, reading lists, work plans, and other key attachments that could be helpful references as you write your own application. Before we go any further, a bit more on eligibility. It is important to important to ensure that you are affiliated with an eligible college or university, because this program prohibits individuals from applying. U.S. accredited public or 501c3 private institutions of higher education are eligible to apply, and additional eligibility details for each category of the program are in the eligibility information section of the NOFO. Individuals, federal, foreign, and for-profit entities are not eligible to apply. Collaboration with other organizations is welcome. The NOFO is your blueprint for how to build a strong application, so I encourage you to become very familiar with this document and use it as your roadmap to what we hope will be success. Just a bit on how it's organized. The first few sections are descriptive. What is this program? What is it about? What we're looking for? Who's eligible? And so on. Section D provides the specifics of exactly what to include in your application and how to format it. Section D includes an application components table, which you can use as your checklist to make sure you've included everything you need. Check here for things like page limits and how to save and title your attachment files. You'll also want to pay attention to the review criteria in Section E. This program has 3 criteria: intellectual quality, design quality and feasibility, and potential for significant impact. These are spelled out in Section E through a series of questions, and these are the same questions that reviewers will use to evaluate your proposal. As you write your application, keep these review criteria in mind. You'll notice that each section is tied to one or more of the review criteria, which can help you understand how each section will be evaluated during the review process.
The narrative is the most important part of your application because it contains the substantive intellectual components of your project. Your narrative should contain these 6 sections, which you can find detailed in Section D of the NOFO under Application and Submission Information. I encourage you to organize your narrative in this order, using these section headers and taking care to address each of the specific questions for each respective section, as this will help reviewers know exactly where to go to find the information they're looking for. The narrative must be no more than 8 single-spaced pages with 1-inch margins and a font size no smaller than 11 points. Applications whose narratives exceed 8 pages will be deemed ineligible. In the intellectual rationale section, you want to explain why now. What makes your project compelling? What makes your project important to your institution and to the humanities? What kind of impact will your project have and what audience will it serve? Connect it back to teaching and learning at your institution. Narrative space is limited, so I like to encourage applicants to give a thorough overview and use specific and strategic examples to illustrate your points and bring your application to life for the reviewer. If the intellectual rationale is the why, design and activities is the how. How will you make your project happen? What are the texts and resources that will serve as the foundation for your project? What are you going to do during your project and why? Think of this as a space to summarize and highlight key pieces from your detailed work plan and reading list attachments, contextualizing them within the bigger picture of your narrative. Go beyond a simple schedule or list of readings to explain the rhyme and reason for how your project will unfold and why you've chosen to do it this way. This section is your opportunity to take us inside your project so we can actually see and imagine it unfolding in real life. The intellectual quality of your project relies heavily on the quality of the directors, institutional and visiting scholars, consultants, and contributors involved with your project. Grant funding can be used to bring visiting scholars and experts to your institution, as well as to work with local experts such as museum professionals, library or archive staff, public, oral, and local historians, and others. The resumes for key personnel attachment is a great place to include additional details about your project team that you cannot fit into the narrative summary. Resumes for each of the key people on your team are required, and we ask that you condense each resume down to a maximum of 2 pages. We strongly recommend securing and including letters of commitment from each of the individuals, entities, and organizations you'll be working with as part of your project. These letters can be simple email exchanges or more formal letters. Reviewers just want to see confirmation that these people are legitimately on board. Some other items to note: 1, students can be paid for work done on your project, but NEH funds cannot be used for tuition remission or to pay for work done for academic credit. And 2, the institutional grant administrator will handle budgeting and institutional requirements on your end, as well as facilitating official interactions with the NEH. The grant administrator and the project director must not be the same person. The institutional context section of your narrative will explain the situation of the humanities at your institution and how your project will fit into that context. Has your institution made any previous attempts to address project objectives, or does this project build on a previous NEH grant? If yes, provide some background. Do you plan on collaborating with any other organizations? Are there any institutional resources you'll draw on? This section will be supplemented by your required institutional letter of support attachment. When thinking of who to select to write your letter of institutional support, You want to balance getting the highest ranking academic official possible, say your dean, provost, or president, with having someone who can write a thoughtful and personal letter that demonstrates familiarity with and full-bodied support for your project. NEH reviewers will also want to see the institutional impact that you envision for your project. What do you hope to accomplish? How will your project benefit students, faculty, and/or your community? And how will you communicate your successes to others? How can you extend the reach of your project, either at your institution or with a wider audience? And finally, every educator's favorite, evaluation and assessment. This section will eventually tie into the annual and final reports for NEH that will be required of funded projects. NEH does not require a specific assessment format or method. You should create an evaluation plan that will best assess the goals and benchmarks you've identified for your project. Generally, we do recommend that evaluation plans include both formative and summative evaluation and include both quantitative and qualitative measures as appropriate. Your narrative and attachments should be succinct, self-explanatory, well-organized, and free from technical terms and jargon. You want to balance breadth and depth, being at once clear and concise, while also being sufficiently descriptive and illustrative. You're writing your application for an audience of NEH reviewers, so write with both specialists in your field and generalists from outside your field in mind, as both will be reviewing your application. As you're adding attachments to your grants.gov application package, be sure to only attach PDFs. If you accidentally attach a Word, Excel, JPEG, or other file, your application will be automatically marked as ineligible by our system. So please make sure that you and your institutional grant administrator are careful to only include PDFs as attachments. Aside from the narrative and subsequent attachments, your application will also include a budget using the research and related budget form that's preloaded in your grants.gov application portal. You'll complete this form within grants.gov and it will automatically integrate into your application package, so you do not have to upload it as a separate attachment. Because this is a government-wide form, be sure to read the Application and Submission Information section of the NOFO for exactly how to fill it out for this grant program's purposes. Note that all projects are required to submit a budget justification to complement the budget form itself. This can be in any format you choose: bullet points, a narrative, spreadsheets, and tables, or some combination of the above. Just be sure to attach this as a PDF, saved as justification.pdf, to your budget form.
Speaking of NEH funding, it's also important to be aware of NEH's funding restrictions. You can find a more complete listing in the funding restrictions section of the NOFO, but I want to caution you against some of the most common pitfalls we see. NEH cannot fund the promotion of a particular political, religious, or ideological point of view, advocacy for a particular program of social or political action, or support of specific public policies or legislation. The best ways to avoid this are to, 1, include diverse and varied voices, scholars, and sources. 2, present participants with unbiased information and allow them to draw their own conclusions. 3, root contemporary real-world issues in the humanities, especially history, and focus on the humanities content in your application. And 4, avoid buzzwords, language, and goals related to advocacy and activism. What you might see as the application of the humanities to real-world situations, a reviewer might see it as advocating for a particular cause or program of social action. But by being careful to include different viewpoints and keeping the focus on open inquiry, you should be able to sidestep these sticky areas. The NEH also cannot fund projects that fall outside of the humanities. We most often see this with projects that try to incorporate the creation or performance of art, or projects that involve participants doing creative writing or creating autobiographies, memoirs, or creative nonfiction. We also sometimes see this with projects that focus on social science research or policy studies, or projects that focus on pedagogy or methodology. We value effective pedagogy and sound methodology, but your project must be driven by humanities content. NEH cannot fund tuition fees for student assistants, nor can it fund work undertaken in pursuit of an academic degree or individual research projects. Additionally, NEH cannot fund things like social events, banquets, alcohol, or entertainment. Drafts. Drafts are optional, and they're one of the best ways for you to get detailed and specific feedback about your application from an NEH program officer. Drafts should be submitted via email to our email address hi@neh.gov by March 26th. I recommend sending your materials as email attachments. We aim to complete these and return feedback as quickly as possible, but we cannot review drafts submitted after the deadline of March 26th. The narrative is generally the most helpful item to submit, but you're welcome to include other attachments such as your reading list, work plan, budget, especially if you have a particular question you like our program officers to address. If you're struggling to pull together a full narrative in time for the draft deadline, you're also welcome to send a sketch or outline of your project for more general feedback. If you would prefer to have a phone conversation to answer questions rather than submit a draft, please reach out to schedule a call. Reach out with what you've got. Some feedback is better than no feedback. Of course, the more complete, the more helpful the feedback that can be provided. Final applications are due by 11:59 p.m. Eastern on May 7th. Instructions on how to submit your final application via grants.gov are included in the NOFO. Please note, only complete applications submitted through grants.gov by the deadline will be reviewed. Do not wait until the last minute in case of technical issues and to account for processing time to validate in the grants.gov system. It is also a good idea, especially if you're at a larger institution, to check with your institutional grant administrator or your grants office to see if they have an earlier internal deadline you will also need to be aware of. When getting ready to submit your final application, the first step is to ensure that your sam.gov, your sam.gov and login.gov registrations and passwords are current, because NEH will not grant deadline extensions for delayed registration. Registration in these systems can take up to a month to complete, so check on this straight away. Note that applications now access grants.gov using their login.gov credentials. Remember, you're applying as an institution, not as an individual. Your institutional grant administrator or other grant management or sponsored program staff are great contacts for guidance if you're not sure where to find your institution's account information. When you are in grants.gov, be sure to select or have your grant administrator select the appropriate package based on your project type, so your application is evaluated appropriately. For example, if you're an HBCU, be sure to select the correct application package for HBCUs instead of the general one for colleges, and universities. This is a very common error, so be sure to double check with your grant administrator that you or they have got the correct package for your project. Once you've pressed send, the waiting game begins. In August, applications will go to peer review panels for initial review. These panels consist of humanities scholars and past project directors whose input forms the foundation and informs subsequent recommendations. In November, applications will go before the NEH, National Council on the Humanities. Afterwards, final funding decisions will be made by the NEH chair. We expect decision notifications to be made in December for grants beginning as early as February 1st and as late as September 1st. As noted in the NOFO, we expect to award around 20 projects in the cycle, spread out among the Humanities Initiative 5 categories. You can find each category's 3-year averages by scrolling to the bottom of its respective program page. That said, we do not know going into any review panel or even when the National Council convenes exactly how many projects will ultimately be funded. Regardless of the outcome, you can get the most out of your relationship with the NEH by asking for your review comments once decisions have gone out in December, contacting us for additional feedback or guidance, volunteering to serve as an NEH panelist for an inside look at how the process works and what makes a strong application. You can sign up at this link or find it by Googling NEH panelist sign up and applying again for this and other grant opportunities.
So with that, thank you so much for joining us. Here is our contact information, which is also listed online and in the NOFO. And please don't hesitate to reach out with questions and drafts. We look forward to hearing from you and hopefully working with you on a project of your own. Thank you again for your time and interest in the NEH's Humanities Initiatives Grant Program. And remember, we will be hosting a live Q&A on Tuesday, March 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can find the link for the session on the Humanities Initiatives program page at neh.gov. Thank you.